positivity thing.
Okay, what about the black though? If I say either his shirt is black or it's not black.
That's a truth. Truth is universal to everyone.
Although
certain people are colourblind, innit? They got red and green. We're gonna be like, what colour is that? They are going to swear to God it's red.
Okay.
They're gonna swear. We'll argue with them. We'll be like, oh, are you crazy? We'll pick up the brush and try to him closer. He's still saying it's red.
Okay. What about either you have two eyes or you have more or less than two eyes?
I don't know. It depends.
Can you have surely those are the only options. Either you have two eyes or you have a different number of eyes.
Or you don't have any eyes and your consciousness is creating the entire reality
But that's still not having. That's still not having
what
two
you mean
eyes.
by saying the only
By the definition of what eyes are.
Because everything else
Things that you
beyond
can
that
see
could just
outside.
be.
That's what I'm saying.
Maybe
Same with
And I have two.
as long as we have a
I know
concept
that
of
was saying
terms,
I have two.
that proves my point.
Yeah, sorry.
You know what I'm saying? I know I have two.
You can
But
only
if someone else is gonna come and say like you
That's
said,
what I
how do
said.
you know it's just not an illusion?
So is the Bible.
If you're using
I
logic,
know.
the Bible
From
is
as
the
far as
Bible.
truth that I know so far.
It's independent of
27 years.
Is the Bible
I have
absolutely
two
true?
Till
I believe
somebody
it's
can
absolutely
prove to me or sit down
based
and show
on
me that I don't,
how I've rationally come
then I
to a
believe that.
conclusion.
But I don't feel like
You cannot be absolutely.
you should put yourself in a box of
cannot be
I believe
absolutely
this
sorry,
definitely
I'm sorry.
because
You can't judge.
I believe something until you show me different.
And anyway, it also comes. It's not just rationalized. It's also emotions. It's also intuition. There's so many things that come into it. I'm just using intellect and logic as one basis anyway, just to say.
I asked you a question, by the way, long ago. I said, how do you know logic is absolutely true? Why is it not false? I'm asking you.
The only way, this is how I can understand it. The only way logic can be false is if you go beyond the concept. That's why I kept using the whole concept of nihilism, and you go to absurditism where it destroys logic in itself, because that means you can't even use logic. Nothing works, so nothing makes sense.
How do you know logic is absolutely true?
Wait, how do I know?
How do you know? Yeah.
Because logic cannot. Okay, this is how logic works.
So you know the laws of logic, right?
Logic is just used as a way of knowing one thing to another. It's just based on consistency.
How?
It's
I would say
an
a burning bush
instrument
talking is
to
definitely
determine reality. So how are you sure this instrument
Or
is
we just
not
don't know.
faulty?
We don't know how it works.
No. I said logically, I'm saying it defies the law of logic for that bush to start burning and talking. That defies logic. That's supernatural.
I would say that defies-
is going
I would say it defies
outside of
physics.
That's why people describe it as the supernatural, because it's outside
Yeah.
of what people see. A
Physics.
man rising from the dead,
Physics.
is not logical.
It would defy
That
physics.
is going against the laws of logic. Once something is dead, it is usually dead. For something to come back to that,
I'm
it's
not
just
denying
gone
what you're saying.
Outside of the laws of
I
logic.
wouldn't say logic. I'd say physics.
Yeah, I think it's more about physics.
Yeah.
You're saying, but I'm saying, okay, so how does physics work? How does maths work? It all works on the basis of...
Maths is different from.
No, I didn't say, it don't matter, but it all works, how do you count to 10?
Foundation.
It works on the foundation of logic.
Yeah,
2 plus
maths
2
does.
works on the foundation of
So
logic.
how can you be
But
sure?
the real world might be
Now
different.
I'm even
though.
asking you a different question, entirely different
But
question.
that's what. But I don't believe that. I don't believe that logic is the absolute truth. I don't.
It depends on what you mean by logic. Because I have a feeling I
In
know
these
what you
3
mean by logic.
dimensions, yes. Can you work out the distance from here to this tree using logic? Yeah, you
Philosophy
can.
of
But not
time,
for
A
everything.
theory and B theory. A theory is like there's past, present, and future, and B theory is like a clock, like everything is existing at the same time. But yeah, that's a different case. I'm asking you. You said logic, so we can see logic as an instrument to determine reality.
Yeah.
Like law of identity, you exist. Law of non-contradiction, you cannot exist and not exist at the same time. But I'm asking you, how do you know that logic is absolutely true and not false? Why can't the instrument be faulty? Why must it be accurate with certainty?
The instruments can be faulty, but the logic cannot be faulty because we're just using one thing to another thing to another thing. That's all logic is. It's just, it helps us to express one thing to another thing works. That's all logic is. It doesn't go beyond that.
The fact that logic is consistent, I hold to be a point of faith. If you believe that tomorrow the logic that you have considered to be true will no longer be true, or no longer function in the same way that it has, say if we're going to treat it as a process, then, again, this could all be our own dreams. We could all be dreaming right now. Philosophers have talked about that more eloquently than I can. But
We could be
the fact,
mistaken.
who knows? But like, logic, as we define it and as we know it, could fall apart tomorrow. And the fact that it won't, I run on faith, and not religious faith, but just by faith that my perception of the universe, as it has been my entire life through my experiences and through my teachings and all of that, from all of the teachers I've ever had, will continue to run the same way it has. We can't have objective fact, like proof of that, because the only truth we have is our own existence.
And that's
Everything
why
else
they
builds
call them,
upon that, based on
What was you
experience.
going to say?
they call them axioms because you can't prove
Yeah.
them, right? So like you can't sort of prove the law of non-contradiction. It's something that people just have to try and take, because if you try and prove it, you're going to have to use some other logic later down the line, like more developed logic.
So
And
you have to start somewhere
start.
with
Yeah,
the
exactly.
faith that things will continue to work as they
Yeah,
have.
like they seem to be true, but we can't prove it.
Yeah, you were saying you can only be sure, absolutely sure of your own existence. So that's why I brought in the logic question, because logic is independent of your existence. It's a tool which it's not part of you basically. Yeah. So I was saying like, why you, if you're only certain about your existence, why did you extend it to logic? That was the kind of question I was asking you.
Should I explain it, or do you think you understand it? Or... No, because I was saying because logic is only
Because
logic.
epistemological
Logic-
solipsism says like I can only be sure of me existing.
Right.
Well, you're using laws of logic to be sure of
Right.
your own existence.
Because logic is
So that means you're certain on laws of logic. So it's like, yeah.
yeah, and what I was saying is we only use logic because logic is used as a consistency. It can never be wrong. No matter how much you change, it can never be wrong. The only way logic can be wrong, that's why I was trying to get into the point of, if you're going past solipsism, if you're going past the fact that you don't even exist in itself, then you're going to get to absurditism, like everything's absurd. You can't even prove logic, because existence and saying that you exist is based on logic. If you deny logic, then you deny your own existence.
That's a paradox of
And that becomes a paradox.
epistemological solipsism, because
Right.
you're also sure of the laws of logic aside your existence.
Right.
So it's like two things.
Right.
Yeah, so you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, so you're sure of logic and you're also sure that you exist. So yeah, good conversation, I guess.
Every time you say like I think therefore I am, like using that word therefore is kind of like using logic, because you're saying one thing implies
Sure, exactly.
another. So you have to start with logic, then do later things.
Take a leap of faith.
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise you can't do anything.
What
It's just-
was the discussion like? What were we trying to understand?
We were going through everything. We started off with free will, then we started going on logic.
Oh, I
You're
missed
being
free
interviewed
will.
on a lot of.
I came in at the nature of truth was where I came in.
Hey, how's it going? What's going on?
I saw this conversation with you and Bob the
This is
Builder.
the philosophy corner.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
nice. I gotta
philosophy.
join in.
That'll be fun.
Bob the
Yeah.
Builder. I saw a video with you and Bob. Yeah, I think like Watchmaker.
There's two of them. One is
two
the last
Bob
one. That's the
Builders.
watchmaker. No,
I saw the title like Watchmaker.
that's
Even
the
if
last
there's
one.
a watchmaker, it's not reflective of an Abrahamic God. It's reflective of a deistic God.
Yeah, I know it's not
A
supposed to
God
prove.
that does not interfere in the universe. So I don't know why Bob
No,
is
no,
a
no.
Christian and he's using
No,
the
no,
watchmaker.
no, I
and
disagree.
I think he was trying to use it to prove the concept of God. I don't
Yeah.
think he was going
Yeah,
beyond
he
that.
was trying to prove to me the concept of God, because seeing that the universe is complex, it needs to have a reasonable intelligence
Yeah.
behind it.
Also,
That's watchmaker fallacy.
different flavors, different sects of Christianity have variously been theistic and deistic, so the concept of a watchmaker god has been aligned with Christianity.
Well, it's aligned with all religions, basically.
All religions that have a god.
Well, which
Some-
religions don't have a god?
Buddhism. There are religions that do not contain
Yeah,
belief or
Buddhism is
disbelief
kind
in
of an
specific gods.
exception, because Buddhism is more about a position in the world for you to go for. Like, Buddha is not an actual predetermined god, he's just a guy who lived a very
Wait, correct me if
specific
I'm wrong,
life.
but doesn't Buddhism kind of believe in the concept of being one with the universe, being a part of the universe?
Yeah, kind of.
So if it's being a part of the universe, I think just in Hinduism they believe that's also God as well.
But Buddhists
No,
don't
but the
necessarily
Hinduism is
believe
very
the same
different to
thing.
Buddhism.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying that I think that's what people.
It can be interpreted. Yes, of course.
That's what they're talking
But
as.
they
I
don't
don't
necessarily
think Buddhism is
interpret
pantheistic. I don't think it's
No, I'm not
Do you
saying. I'm
guys
not saying
know?
that.
Do you guys know the
Well, actually,
theory of creation of
actually,
Buddhism?
I think it is.
How
I
the
think it
world
is.
came to be
Oh, go on.
I
according to
don't.
Buddhism.
Go on.
You don't know?
Don't keep us all in suspense.
No, I don't know. I want to know if anybody knows.
I don't think Buddhism sets out with a specific creation myth and set a god or set of gods. That's not the type of religion that Buddhism is, because religion is a broader category than just belief or disbelief in god or gods.
Well, yeah,
Pantheism is a kind of religion, and that has no specific god.
is socialism a kind of religion?
What?
It's an ideology.
Exactly. I don't think hippieism is a religion. You can call it kind of
I think that's
spiritualism.
splitting hairs, and religious studies departments contain studies of Buddhism, so it's acknowledged
It's
as a
called a
religion.
religion.
It's called a religion, exactly.
Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah, terminology
And it also
aside.
has like a belief of like a supernatural
Yes,
force,
supernatural. I think that's the
because like
reason.
if you
I think
believe in
like
karma, that's kind of like how is that? That's not going to happen in just a materialistic universe.
Yes.
I
It
think
needs-
the biggest distinction between
I guess
a
karma
religion-
is the god of Buddhists.
I don't think karma is a Buddhist thing, actually. I think karma is a Hindu thing that has to do with reincarnation.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, like reincarnation
So-
goes against the natural law.
But I thought Buddhists were the ones who believed in reincarnation.
They do.
Not necessarily.
They do.
I think Buddhists believe in ascension to a heightened state of belief and heightened state of being. But that's, as far as I'm aware, a personal ascension and not an everlasting or afterlife ascension.
No, but
It's a
if you
cycle,
don't
isn't
go,
it? For Hindus, it's a cycle.
That's for
Life,
Hindus, yeah.
death, yeah,
no,
reincarnation.
I'm none of these religions, though, so I cannot speak with
I
authority.
think Buddhism believes that if you don't get nirvana, then you have to come again until you get nirvana.
Maybe.
I think
Yeah,
that's what
you
it is.
reincarnate
You can check
again.
it out. Yeah, until you get reincarnation is only in order that you can get to that place of
I
nirvana.
mean, it kind of grew out of Hinduism, didn't it?
Yeah.
Didn't it? Buddhism. So it's going to have some things in
I'm
common
not sure.
with Hinduism and Indian philosophy.
It came out of that society.
Yeah.
I
But
just
then
feel
It's
again,
a very
religion
kind
can
religion in
include-
Buddhism. Like they don't have heaven or hell. That you won't suffer your whole life because you lived a shitty life. You'll just reincarnate like a rock, maybe.
but
that
that's like
sounds pretty hell.
It's like
I mean,
hell.
it's a bit
Being
like hell, but
reincarnated like
When you're
it's
a
just-
rock, you don't feel anything, right?
You mean it's not like
No, I
fire?
think it's a living. I think it's a living.
Depends on what you mean, because they will argue about consciousness.
Yeah,
Remember?
yeah,
The
it's
thing
true.
is,
Would they
how
say
do
it
you
has a
rise
conscience?
up again if you reincarnate as a rock?
When you die.
No, but how do you rise?
Oh, because
You
your
didn't
soul
do
leaves the
anything
rock.
during your
because
life.
after 70 years of being in the rock, you suddenly leave.
They believe
I
in
mean, I
method.
imagine that Buddhist scholars have
If you
discussed
become a
this
good
in
rock-
more nuance
Oh,
than we
God, I'm
can.
getting
None of us
old.
knowing
I'm
anything
getting
about
old. I'm
Buddhism.
nearly 60 years old. I'm getting old.
Actually, that's a good point. I never thought about that.
No, but they believe in metempsychosis, so the transmigration of souls, which can only involve a soul going into another living creature. So you can be reborn as a
Do
cockroach.
they only believe that they reincarnate as living beings?
even
Only as
this,
living beings.
I think so.
I know there's a meme, like there's a joke
Yeah.
of Buddhism that you reincarnate as a rock. Probably they don't believe it.
No,
It's only as living beings.
living
Only as
Only
living
living.
beings.
But
Yeah, that's what I
actually,
thought.
for the classical Hindu belief, I think this is hell. The fact that we're stuck in the cycle of birth,
Hindu.
death, and rebirth.
So how'd you get out?
So the whole point is to get out of this cycle, this vicious cycle.
So that's the same.
My main point was just that religion
higher.
as a concept as we use it in humanity doesn't necessarily contain belief in deities, because exactly, religion can be a set of traditions, ritual, culture.
What do you think the definition of religion is?
I took a whole course on this and I don't have an answer.
Have you studied
Maybe that's why
comparative
you believe
religion?
in it.
I took a course called Atheists versus Believers, Religious Debates. That was about
what was your
defining
major?
religion versus spirituality.
I'm assuming you did a major because you're American. You
No,
studied in
I
the
was.
US.
It was a create your own major program.
So
I
if you
did
didn't
it
understand
to
how
do
fire works, would you say
intersectionality,
that that's
English,
supernatural?
drama, also religious studies, disability studies, gender studies, sociology, all of those kind of mixed together and then applied to English.
Liberal arts and
Basically.
humanities.
Like primitive beings. So the more we learn about, the more we discover the nature of the supernatural parts of the civilized
But then, so then, in other words, there's no actual real thing as supernatural, in the sense of the fact that we can always figure things out. So technically,
I think there's some things
current
which
with
we
the
can
actual
actually know the
studies.
truth of for a time. So for example, things out, scientific
I was going to ask about like they had this kind of view about like sort of sociology and
quantifiable things.
sort of since humans are kind of like part of society and studying sociology can have an effect on society itself that somehow that makes it like you couldn't
absolutely
create
true.
theories of sociology the same way you could create
The
theories
workings
of
of the
physics or
mind can be
engineering where you like
quantifiable.
observe a
Are
phenomenon.
quantifiable by science, physiology, and neuroscience.
You couldn't like just straight up apply the scientific methods to sociology.
But they're applying.
You can only measure
whether you
the,
can
let's say the
sort of
direct
how much
impact.
sympathy you had with that kind kind of idea.
But
I don't know, because I think the
neuroscientists are
processes that
trying
we
to measure
create are necessarily
mental
affected
processes.
by our positions as, let's say, Western researchers with our methodology. I'm being redundant, you know what I mean. The methodology, nothing is without bias, including things like science and the way that we conceive of things like logic. So I don't have an answer necessarily, but I'm imagining that any sociological study carried out by people from a specific position of a specific viewpoint, I guess not necessarily position of privilege or whatever, but from a specific viewpoint on a society that does not have the same viewpoints. Any sociological study will be inherently flawed by the fact that it's not an introspective study by the people. I don't know. I think it's difficult.
Yeah, it's something that you have to kind of keep in mind.
And possibly the idea that any sociological study will necessarily impact or have an impact on the group that they're studying by the presence of the sociologists. You know, the fact that they're there will affect the culture that they're observing, and if the culture that they're observing, if they're not there, then how will they truly be able to be immersed in all of that?
Even the answers in a questionnaire, they can be predetermined by the fact that it's not a natural setting. Someone's responses to a question.
My instinct is to agree that any sociological study is flawed and cannot be thought of as the same as you can the scientific method in other contexts. But I don't know.
Yeah.
I could be proven wrong tomorrow.
But how can you study social groups if without them knowing that you're studying them?
And if they
So what do you just mimic? Maybe do you just pretend you're part of the group to establish what they believe and how they live?
And I think that's
You just have
bad.
like security cameras that they don't see or something.
But
like,
then, how do you know that you're really getting an accurate picture? That there's not a blind spot in your security cameras, which there generally has been in all of sociological history. It's really an incredibly biased field.
True. But sometimes I feel like certain people might be so pessimistic about the fact that kind of as members of a particular society we will have cultural biases, and so our sociological investigations will be flawed in this way. Sometimes people are so pessimistic about that fact that they kind of think that it is almost better to sort of do sociological investigations just on a purely theoretical basis rather than doing kind of trying to apply the scientific methods as best we can. So like there are some people who kind of like they come up with sociological theories just in their armchair kind of by themselves, thinking like I think that's maybe critical theory, or like maybe gender theory, like maybe the real genders should be like this, and they don't necessarily like check that against kind of evidence. Like I know
Their theories are going to be under scrutiny and debunked because they don't have a grounding in research, in concrete investigations.
But some people, like some feminists, for example, like
Data.
I know, often like in their writings about like kind of they'll have like writings that are like kind of essays, but not necessarily like kind of experiments or like kind of gathering like loads of research. Like some of the most sort of famous feminist voices, like I think they're more famous for their kind of their writings and their kind of views than necessarily like kind of let me check kind of whether this is the case.
But even quantifiable research presupposes a particular theory. So theory is always there anyway. Whatever sociological, or psychological, historical research or religious research you're undertaking, you're always approaching the subject with some certain assumptions and a certain element of theory.
To the earlier point, the idea that our ignorance should prevent us from pursuing further knowledge, that because I am ignorant and I know that my studies will be flawed, therefore I shouldn't still try to learn about the other culture, or about the other society, or the feminist theory, or any of that. I think that's a very silly idea. The more we learn, the better equipped we will be to then pursue more study in a more accurate or compassionate way. As for the feminist thing, I don't know. I mean, I don't know which authors you're talking about, and if you told me, I don't know that I would have read their work, so I don't have specifics for this. But I imagine that some of them either, they probably should be going back into praxis and doing stuff before they can sit back and theorize about it. But they also could be responding to earlier critiques and theories and more of a, so there is a place, I think, in academia for just back and forth discourse.
Yeah, like exploring ideas, I guess.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And I don't think that necessarily has to connect back to practice.
No.
It's just when you try to apply those things without having that research or practice foundation, that's when you get into trouble.
Wouldn't you say that one of the biggest influences in feminist theory, post-colonial theory, is Marxism?
Yeah,
Elements of Marxism.
I haven't read enough Marxist text to have a firm opinion
a
on
lot
it,
of it
but I
is an
do think.
outgrowth of-
I think it would be pretty hard to say that Marx didn't have an incredible impact on the face of our history.
Yeah, like
in
the 20th century.
20th century. I mean, regardless of your opinion on his work, it definitely changed a lot of people's thoughts about economics, feminism. Everyone's influenced by that.
Even where he and other Marxists don't explicitly talk about feminist, gender, his views can still be transferred,
And I
have
think
been transferred.
even just his framing of things, the way that he processes ideas, those have made their way into the discourse of academia. They're going to perpetuate.
The view that there's a dominant, socio-economically dominant.
Marxism doesn't have a whole lot to do with
subordinate groups
democracy has
who
more
are
to do with
subject to various
There are a
processes
lot of
in
Marxist
society
feminists,
without
and I don't know enough about Marxism to say
this
why
is
there's
still
that intersection.
one of the
but I
assumptions that
imagine
has
that
been
there's a reason for
transferred
it.
from what I understand
And what I'm saying
into
is that
feminist theory.
the way that Marx presented his ideas or thought about his
this
ideas,
group of
even
sort
if
of
the ideas
sociologists
themselves
who
aren't
sort
in other fields,
of moved from
the fact
Germany
that his
to
work is
California.
influential and the fact that
And
he's
they're called like
influential
the
as a
Frankfurt
philosopher,
School.
Frankfurt
I
School,
imagine
I think they
that
were
the way he discussed
Austrian.
things has made
maybe.
that sort of framework of the way he
But
processes
I mean, probably
ideas
some of them
has
would have
been
been,
become
but
part of
like,
academia
Frankfurt
because
School.
I
as
guess
most
like,
influential
you also have like French
authors and
people,
philosophers'
like
works have been, they
post-structuralists,
influence
like
the discourse,
Derrida and
even in the fields they're not in, just based on how we
Sartre.
frame
It's
things.
okay for you to
Yeah,
link the two
Foucault,
things,
exactly,
but
yeah.
still, I don't
So-
think there's a whole lot
And they're
of
not
room
actually
to
part
go
of the
that
Frankfurt
way.
School, but somehow
Because
they kind
Marx
of,
never really
I know, they end
spoke
up
about gender.
They
So
coalesce.
never really
Yeah.
said
I'm not
anything
saying
about
that
gender.
I'm not
And
saying
feminism
that
is based about gender issues.
I'm not saying Marx had an opinion on feminism. I'm saying that the way that Marx spoke about his work and the way he reasons things, those tactics may be used in other fields as well. Even though his
Which tactics?
I haven't read enough Marx to tell. I was asked the question. I'm speaking theoretically. I'm just saying, academics in general and philosophers, even when their ideas don't touch on specific topics,
feminist, right?
I mean, yeah.
Oh, okay, right. Good question, right?
I mean,
I kind of feel like I used to be like a male intersectional feminist, but like I kind of realised to me that like I can't really call myself a feminist because I intentionally treat women differently to the way I treat men. So I'm always a lot more careful about the way. Obviously, I'm going to be like all out with you because like
Okay.
you're a feminist and you
Go
seem
for
like
it.
a smart girl.
Okay.
Like, but
Thank you.
I think like men are being told to. Like I thought feminism was
Let's open
like
this up a
equality.
little bit, guys.
Yeah, why
I
not?
thought feminism was about equality, but men are being told to treat women differently. So it's kind of like paradoxical. So it seems to me more like sexism through low expectations.
I think you're talking about the difference between equality and equity.
Yeah.
So equality is treating everyone the same way. Equity is treating everyone so that the end point they reach is the same. So for instance, things like affirmative action. Right now, I can only speak to America because I'm American. So I'm just going to use that that's my example. I'm not making a big statement.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
Okay, so in America, affirmative action works so that the classes in our society that have been systematically disadvantaged are now brought up to the same level as those of us who have been advantaged through things like, you know, oh, my dad was in the same country club as the dean of admissions, so I have that advantage working for me that other people who haven't been given those same positions historically don't have. That is a form of equity because it's bringing everyone to the same level playing field, even though some people need more of a boost than others.
So wait,
That's
you're
not
linking.
real.
I mean, I'm not
wait.
speaking to the effectiveness of it. I'm just talking about the.
So if there's
Just
no
get something
effectiveness,
straight.
why do we
guys.
keep using it?
Just a quick question. So you're linking equality with equality of opportunity, and you're linking equity with equality of outcome.
Yeah, I suppose that's true.
Just making
So,
this
for instance,
I think, like, not to be rude, a lot of men are kind of pulling their hair out of their heads. By the way, I used to be a feminist, so I'm very much like, and I still defend women. When people talk about like, combats in in wars, you know, my continuous argument is against that is that more women died fighting the Nazis at Stalingrad than men who landed on the beaches of Normandy. So when people use this sort of argument, it just doesn't really count.
Well, in Stalingrad, people were getting bombed in the city, so it's obvious that women would die. It wasn't exactly
No, they were fighting. There were female soldiers.
I think that's just an example.
Front of line fight.
Russian partisans.
It's a bit exaggerated. There were female snipers in the Soviet army.
Yeah,
And
but in a
sometimes
sense,
female
It's not important to the main point he
plane
was making.
pilots.
The point is,
And it wasn't in a very
I'm
huge
someone
number.
I'm not a woman hater. Like
Yeah.
this continuous
You don't
hatred
need to
towards
say
this continuous hatred for films like what is it? Captain Marvel. I love Captain Marvel. I thought it was brilliant.
Me too.
But I'm constantly in this state where I'm sort of like. I'm not really, you know, I can't really speak to women the same way I speak to men, but I'm being told that I have to treat them, yeah.
There isn't
How
just one
so?
type of feminism as well, like kind of. Just because like one feminist magazine says that, like they aren't like, you know, it's
not a hive
it's a broad,
mind.
you know, it's
I mean,
a broad,
she's like
it's
a real
broad
feminist.
tradition.
She's not like.
I'm a real
Feminism
feminist.
nowadays is straight
all
far from
feminists
what
are gonna
feminism
consider
was in
themselves
the
I mean, yeah,
There are differences and disputes.
exactly. Yeah, within
way
any social movement, there will be differences in different factions and different institutions.
For example, one touchy subject here in the UK is whether transgender women are. This is an ongoing dispute within the feminist movement. They can be whether or not they can be considered proper women, and there are many staunch feminists who vehemently object to the idea that a former man can ever appreciate the experiences that someone who is born a woman can
It's
go
hugely
through.
divisive in the feminist and the queer community.
Aren't they called
Violent
TERFs though? The ones who hate trans women.
I mean, it stands for trans exclusionary radical feminist. So yeah, so that's the term that we use to define to mark someone who excludes trans people. So yeah.
Yeah, let's
Neutral
talk
term.
about that. What do you think about the transgender who participate in sports against women? Transgender men who transition to women and they participate against women.
So terminology moment, transgender person who transitions to a woman
From man to a
is
woman.
referred to as a trans woman. A trans man is someone who transitions to a man.
Okay,
just so that make sure that we're using the same words. My personal opinion on that, if you want it, is that there's a lot of diversity in just humans. There are women who are designated to be women from birth. They have vaginas and all that, and they have high levels of testosterone, and they're allowed to compete with other women. So like. There are also Michael Phelps has a really weird body. Michael Phelps is not built like the average man. Does that mean that he shouldn't be able to compete with other men? Isn't he like double jointed or something?
But you can make the same argument for all athletes. You could say Usain Bolt. So
you are
exactly.
for
The
that?
fact that you can, I think that means that. Yeah, I think trans people are just another level of diversity in the human condition to do with bodies. There's a lot of body diversity in sports. Why is this the sticking point?
Can I ask a question? Could I get you in the middle and saying it seems like there are so many trans women in sports, they might as well just have their own league.
Are there? Can you name how many? Can you name any of them?
I can name you a lot of champion. I think the ones who seem to be smashing all the other, not to be sexist.
I'll come to that.
I actually don't know the actual names. The only trans woman I know about is Riley Dennis and ContraPoints and Blair White and Caitlyn Jenner.
If it were to become such an issue that the other women in the sports were feeling consistently beat out, then there could be talks about, okay, well, let's talk about how we can make that more equitable so that everyone's competing on the same playing field. As that has not yet been proven to be a problem, I don't think we need to tackle that.
Because I'm not a bigot, I support transgender stuff, but like.
Say you're not a bigot.
No, I just want to understand that because there's a lot of just like bigoted
I'm not
people.
a pedophile, but that child looks really cute.
There are a lot of just straight up like a lot of the motivation for transphobia is built more on bigotry than actual. Oh, actually, they are doing a little too well in sports. Maybe we should just.
But we don't have the data for that yet. Until it's allowed to happen, and we
I mean, there's been a few cases where like.
Okay, I'd like to say something now. I read about wrestling. Wrestling of like the top two wrestlers, a transgender, a trans woman, as you'd like to call her, and a woman.
was born a woman and a permanent woman.
Cisgender is the term.
Yes,
cisgender.
cisgender. Let's call.
Cis
let's
means
use
on the same
terms.
side, trans
Fine,
means on the other
yeah.
side. It's just a terminology.
Let's call it by the terms. And the woman and the cis woman was saying that on the interview she was saying, I never felt so dominated my whole life. She had a cranium trauma. She had broken bones. She was completely destroyed by the trans
I
woman.
think that's a cage fighter you're talking about.
No, I'm talking about wrestling,
Like high
just
school
wrestling.
wrestling.
My
No,
point
no,
is,
that was-
it has been scientifically proven that in terms of physical strength, men do have more strength than women.
Bone mass to
It doesn't only depend on testosterone.
However, that's a single case study. That's not.
No,
That's
look.
not. That's a
The top ability of a man in terms of physical strength and the top ability of a woman are very different.
What I'm saying is that specific instance of a trans woman versus a cis woman in wrestling, there are very few cases because right now it's not widespread enough it's not allowed enough and it's not studied. One or two instances of a trans woman beating on a cis woman does not a study make. I'm saying give me research and then we can decide where to go from there.
Look, all you have to do is to look.
Very important.
Yeah.
Recently, we had an American gymnast and she got 10. And when they interviewed her, she said she was always put down for her body size because it was too strong. They wanted female gymnasts to look skinny and everything, right? And therefore, in that particular women's sport, you couldn't get the best women to do and push the gymnastic prowess because they kept holding back the women who had the power to do the jumps.
No,
and
because
all that.
slim
They
women
were
will
holding-
naturally
no,
be
no,
better
no.
at gymnastics.
No, they're not. That's wrong.
Yes.
No, they're not.
You're talking about rhythmic gymnastics. You're talking about the sort of
Proper
like
gymnasts,
the flips.
Which
the tumbling.
gymnastic are we talking about?
Like
We're talking about women's gymnastics.
no, exactly which gymnastic. There's different kind of.
We're talking about floor work, bar work.
Okay.
horse
Okay, that's
the
different.
An American of
the,
part.
Yeah, that's different.
Korean
Yeah,
origin.
I agree
She
with
was
that.
like a.
She was told
Yeah,
when
good
she
thing
was
you
younger
said
she
about
would
that.
Yeah,
never.
there's now a
different
she
way.
Yeah, like,
was
there's
told,
times where you like
she was
capture a
told
ball
because
that's like
of her,
skinny.
because of her strength, because she had to. When you got muscle, you're going to be bigger, right?
Yeah.
And you're going and what they were doing was trying to tell the women that they could not perform as gymnasts if they were only a certain size. She broke that rule. She got 10. There was other Afro-American gymnasts who got 10 as well. That didn't have the usual physique that the judges were looking for. They were more muscular, and they did extremely well. But there was still prejudice against the female body that had a muscular toned.
Okay, fine, fair enough. Good for
You
those.
were wrong
Good for
then,
those.
what you just said.
For what? No, but I was
No.
talking about a different way
That
of
was
gymnastics. I was
No,
talking about
no.
a different kind of gymnastics.
Yeah, it
and it's
wouldn't
good that
really
James
matter.
spoke about
It wouldn't really
Sorry?
matter.
Yeah, it does matter.
Why would it
it's
matter?
clear, it's clear that there's a
What?
misunderstanding,
No, it
but
would
it's
matter
cleared up
because
now.
the more muscle a woman has, the more strength she has. So she would be able to compete with a man who has got less muscle.
Well, okay, but the top ability of a man in terms of physical strength and the top ability of a woman, not average,
Well,
not even average,
tell me
average
why-
too.
well, then
But
tell
we're
me
talking
why
about the
the
top
best-
ability. It's
the
very
best-
different. It's on a different
The
level.
best trick pilot in the world is a female.
The who?
The best trick pilot.
Trick pilot.
Trick pilot.
A pilot in a plane.
Yeah, is a female.
So what?
Because
I'm
you
talking
need a
about
lot of
physical
stamina.
strength.
Physical strength, but you are interpreting that on the basis of what?
Sports.
A mesomorphic
Sports.
physique? Mesomorphic physique?
I think he's
Sports.
talking about physical weight lifted.
Not only
Weightlifting?
weightlifting,
No?
football, basketball, baseball, practically all the only two things that women
But I've
excel
seen-
at than
I've
men
seen
are long-range swimming
female-
and sometimes gymnastics.
Tennis.
Women beat men.
We have
Male sports.
women have beat men at tennis
They-
before.
okay,
historically
fair enough. They
speaking.
have beat
Yeah.
men, but the
Yeah.
top men, in the top players of tennis in the world, will always beat the top female
I'm
players.
going to be honest, I don't know enough about sports to argue with you whether or not women or men are better at
Fair
sports overall. What I can say is that and back to the original point, original, whatever. Until trans women in sports have proven to be a systemic issue against cisgender women, I don't think it needs a systemic solution of banning or creating a separate team or whatever, until it proves to be a more than, you know, a couple people's incidents.
Okay. But you said earlier that you know, Michael Phelps was born with like advantages. So even if there were like lots and lots of trans women who ended up dominating sort of sporting competitions, wouldn't you just kind of consider them all to be kind of like, you know, they were just born with advantages like Michael Phelps, so this is the way it should be. Sports isn't about equality. Everyone has, you know, everyone is born with some advantages.
At that point, what I would do was not to create a trans women section, but to say if we need to level the playing field based on body types, there are women with heightened levels of testosterone. There are trans women with lower levels, depleted levels of testosterone. There are intersex trans women. There are trans women who are taking estrogen, you know, consistently.
So
all
something
of those
like
things. It's
something
so
like weight classes, but for testosterone.
Exactly. Weight classes, not necessarily for testosterone, but other. I don't know what's measurable that
like
has
athletic ability.
Exactly. That has a demonstrable, scientifically researched impact upon athletic ability.
But then we also have the fraud of men actually faking to be trans women just to
have a sports career.
I mean,
then it would like
is
if
that shown to be a
people
problem?
doing that.
Is that shown to be a problem? Are they taking estrogen in their daily life? Are they presenting as a woman in their daily life?
Yeah, probably. Like, but maybe if you're like maybe from a like really poor country, then maybe there's more of a sort of incentive to become a sort of famous athlete. But
I guess, but until it's happened and caused a problem, I don't think we need to be deciding on new rules based on a hypothetical.
Okay, fair enough. But look, when will you see that as a problem? I mean, considering that when trans women, every time they competed, they overwhelmed the cis women.
You can't say
almost every single time.
But you're
they
saying that
have shown. No.
But you're saying that based on articles, but you
because
don't,
I actually done some
no,
research.
but do you know what about all the? Do you know for certain that all the other times there aren't trans women who just do averagely, but they aren't reported on? Like you might have read articles where it said like trans women comes first, trans women like breaks new records. What if there are other ones who didn't do that
look,
well?
James, what I'm saying comes from the basis of there being very few trans women. And the fact that there are so many we hear about shows that very incredibly low number of trans women actually manages to get to the top. Disproportionately.
Okay,
exactly.
but still not. You still can't say all, even if it's disproportionate.
Well, okay, not all of them, but
because it's
it's disproportionate.
Rare occurrence. It's exciting when it happens. It's reported upon because it's new. I don't know that based on how much things are reported upon. That's not a research study. You were asked what I would need. I would need a research study that would prove that not only are trans women disproportionately beating up cis women, and that is a problem, but also that the issue is that they're trans, and not that the issue is something like heightened testosterone that could be in other cis women. Again, it's an incredibly diverse category. Trans. You don't know something about one trans person just because you know something about another trans person. It's not a monolith. The group is not a monolith.
Testosterone is not everything. Testosterone doesn't just change your physicality like that. It takes a lot of time to actually
not all men have the same body. Men is a diverse group too, so you can't say anything about all trans women unless you could also say something about all women and all men.
Look, the tendency is what I'm talking about. There's a tendency for trans women to dominate sports.
Not yet. There aren't enough trans women out there for it to be a tendency. I need a research study. That's what I'm saying.
We can notice certain tendencies in the world without research studies. Like, for example, with different races dominating different categories of sports.
But if we're going to put in policy, there needs to be a research study. That's what I'm saying. A tendency can exist, but until you have research to back up your suppositions, you can't create policy based on those tendencies.
You can't base policies on emotion. You have to
well, that's exactly what's being done now. Why are trans women being allowed to participate in sports? Just because they cut part of their body, they make some changes. It's a policy based on emotion, of acceptance, on diversity. That's what I mean. If we are to accept those trans women in sports, we need to do the study first.
A policy
That's what I mean.
of inclusion, beginning with inclusion, in my opinion, beginning with inclusion is a is a better, more equitable standpoint than beginning with exclusion. Saying no, trans women can't compete, and then later allowing them in. You don't have the, like, you don't know then, you don't know the effects of allowing them in. If you've started with the position of no, they cannot compete. If you've started with yes, they can compete, then you can do research. You can see how that works. You can see what effects that has. You can say, is this a smart place to be?
Wouldn't it be
And
more
then you can
reasonable
change
to
it.
actually do the study first and then accept them
How
when you
can you do
actually
a study
know?
with no data? If they aren't competing, you don't have data.
But you can do tests on their
There's
strength.
one example.
Except trans, again, it's a broad category. You can't test one person's strength and apply that to
I would be interested.
There's one category. There's one example off the top of my head.
Transgender people would behave
A
in the
man
military.
who became
That would be interesting. That would be interesting.
and they accepted him taking her.
Well, no, a transgender person in the military,
compete
you know, doing
in a competition with other cis women.
intelligence work. That would be
Cis women, right? Even not cis
yeah, you could get yeah.
Probably the rest.
A guy,
The rest.
The rest.
Yeah, the rest.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about.
Do you know that generally,
women turning into a man.
men are
Or of somebody
physically
who could turn into a man
stronger
and
than women? That would be an unfair. But others,
advantages of that
other
too.
women, it's an unfair advantage.
Yeah, I just think it's unfair to women who are competing in sports. I think a feminist point of view would be to defend the rights of women, because seeing that men have the advantage of physical strength, usually, they should at least, try to see if it's actually beneficial for women to be competing against men like
So
that.
at what point do you say that a trans woman is woman enough to compete with women?
Well,
Because testosterone and estrogen affect muscle density, they
Yeah,
affect
they do.
muscle placement in the body, surgeries, you can do all sorts of things. At some point, there are trans women who are, as far as you can see them, and as far as their blood work comes, indistinguishable from women who were designated as women since birth. So at what point do you say, okay, now you are woman enough that we are going to let you compete? At what point is the line, no, you have too much testosterone? And if we're going to do that, why don't we apply that to women who already have, there are women who were designated as women, cis women, who have more testosterone than other women. Where do you draw those lines?
Just to make things clear. So you're telling me that testosterone and something else, blood estrogen, is basically what determines our muscle mass.
They
part of the equation.
They're part of the
It's an
equation,
equation.
exactly. That's one of the reasons that men tend to have.
So other cis. I don't have
Yeah. Really.
but anyway, so in order to, I feel like in order to deem them as women enough, as
Yeah,
you
yeah,
said,
just-
we understand.
Yeah.
Okay, to be part of that competition, wouldn't it be fair for the other cis women in that competition to reduce the testosterone and the estrogen levels in that transgender woman? Do you get what I mean? To the general levels that are found in cis women.
What I'm saying is that I'm saying that if we're going to make arguments that certain people should or shouldn't compete based on their hormone levels, or you have to take these hormones, you have to lower your testosterone to compete. When do we start applying that to cis women who have elevated levels of testosterone? Because they exist, and there's one, I can't remember her name, but there's a woman right now who is being denied access to her sport because she has elevated levels of testosterone, even though she was designated as a woman from birth. She's cis. She has
I don't think
breasts
that
and all
should
that.
happen. I don't agree with
Exactly.
that.
So, like, where do you draw those lines? Should it be just based on hormones? And if so, when does that start making cis women not able to compete?
At the same time,
probably this will sound very controversial.
Okay.
But if you clone a trans woman, the clone will be a man.
Okay.
Genetically, they still remain a man, even if they make the transition. So if genetically men are stronger than women, then genetically a trans woman will never truly become a woman.
Genetics don't decide strength so much as things, because a lot of what goes into strength are hormones, body composition. Those things are affected by nurture as well.
But would you generally say men are stronger than women?
I would say that, Again, I don't know enough about sports to make a definitive statement.
No, but that's common sense.
Yeah,
though.
sure. Generally speaking, men are stronger than women, but you could also say, I don't know, people with elevated levels of testosterone who have trained their bodies, who have eaten certain foods, are stronger than people who don't.
Yeah.
And yeah, that is currently, that is like, men have elevated levels of testosterone generally, but people who are taking hormones to reduce their level of testosterone don't.
Right. So can we begin with like the premise, at least saying that by men competing, men like cis men, like myself, but like imagine just much stronger, competing in a sport for cis women, right? That would be unfair. That would put me at an unfair advantage. For example, in wrestling, right? Okay.
Depending on the sport, but yeah.
Okay, let's.
Because some sports don't require physical strength, but yeah.
Of course,
Let's assume that
swimming,
we're on that
like
basis.
swimming.
Long
Or like
distance
surfing.
swimming.
Surfing doesn't. Surfing, I think.
Like for example,
Yeah.
let's stay on wrestling.
Let's stay with physical strength based sports. But yeah.
And so I change and I become a transgender woman. Anyway, and I decide, okay, now I want to compete in a competition with other cis women. It's still me, right? It's just that I've made the surgery and now I want to compete in a competition that is for cis women. That means what prevented me from competing in the first place because of the unfair advantage is still there. So what we have to do is locate that unfair advantage, define it.
Exactly. Because if the advantage isn't hormones, then again you have to decide when people who are cis, who have different hormone levels than other people in their gender, when they qualify for the distinction. Because as I was saying before, there's nothing that you can say, very few things that you can say, I don't want to say any absolutes, that you could say about trans people that would be true for every single trans. Not every trans woman has elevated levels of testosterone from being designated a male at birth, because some of them have hormone deficiencies, just like some cis women do. Some people just have hormone deficiencies. Their being trans does not tell you what the hormone.
It's the exception, it's not the rule.
I mean, I would say that body diversity is incredible already. And if we're going to make distinctions based on certain types of bodies, we should make sure that we're applying them based on bodies, not based on trans or cis.
Okay, based on bodies. Okay, cool. Because there's something within my body that naturally makes me, on average, sometimes, superior to women physically. Right?
I'm pretty sure we've pointed that to be testosterone.
Right. But at the same time, is it just testosterone?
I don't know.
Right? Because we've seen huge people at the gym that have very little testosterone.
How do you know they have little testosterone?
Because they have
Vegan Gains.
Okay.
Vegan Gains is the guy who's on YouTube. I don't really like him, but he's a pretty buff guy and he's a vegan and he doesn't eat meat, and meat is one of the main sources of testosterone.
Okay. Well, my point. I'm not taking a position here that we should or shouldn't make distinctions based on things in sport. I don't have a hard position. I haven't thought about it long enough to take a position, and I don't have a position.
I understand.
What I'm saying is that you have to research what is the factor then. And when
help me guide my research, because like if we want to do this, then we have to find the distinction. We have to understand the so-called problem if we want to solve it. So what do you said testosterone?
That's
maybe part of the
an editing
definition. Okay, part of the definition. What could it, other than testosterone? Estrogen. I was never good at the term. So what else could it be? Could it be something else that determines men's strength over women other than testosterone?
I don't know enough about
I think there are other factors. Genetics themselves have part of the answer. Of course, testosterone is a big part of the equation.
Because if we say that testosterone is a big part of the equation, that means that those with higher testosterone levels will be stronger than those with lower testosterone levels. But at the same time, what produces testosterone?
Oh, are you asking?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
Hormones.
Yeah, it's hormones, but I'm pretty sure that hormones come from eugenics. I'm pretty sure. Just based on what I remember from anatomy class.
And eugenics come from genetics.
Cool. So it comes from the genetics, right? women don't have that. So that's why on average you find less testosterone levels with women rather than men. So if a guy who has genitals participates in a cis women competition, I think that de facto puts him in the sphere of an advantage, right? So I think that at least on the basic level, for now, we have to say that if someone has, or a transgender woman still has her genitals.
That just being an example because we don't know what.
I'm trying to comprehend what I just said. And she still has her genitals, then she is. It would be unfair. It would be unfair for her to compete in that competition. Therefore, she should not be in that competition.
My point is just that before we design policy, before we make policy that says yes, they may compete with other women, or no, they must have their own league, or no, they must compete with men, or however we want to decide that policy. Before we decide policy, we need to narrow down what factors are we talking about, what groups does this apply to, what research can we use to back it up. I'm not saying that yes, they should compete with other women, or no, they shouldn't. I'm not taking a stance there. My only point is that before we decide policy, we need to be clear on what we're deciding. We need to have research. We need to have definitions.
100%, because we don't want faulty policies.
Yeah, exactly.
We never want faulty policies. We got to understand the problem before we tackle it. 100%.
I err on the side of inclusion. That's just a personal standpoint.
Okay, what is inclusion based on?
What do you mean? Elaborate.
I mean, do you include absolutely everyone, or do you have a certain way of choosing which people to include and which people should not be included?
In this situation, I err on the side of including all people who identify as women.
But only in this situation.
I mean, in another situation, I may define inclusion as something else because it's just a word that I'm using to talk about this scenario.
So at the moment, what you're saying is that a transgender woman can participate in non-women wrestling. I mean, cis women wrestling.
Until we have enough cases to form a body of research to say that it's a problem, I don't think we should design policy to prevent a problem.
Okay, but at the same time, okay, let's say the issue that we talked about, the specific empirical case that we use, gets repeated. And we can see that in most competitions where cis women are participating with transgender women, who still have their genitals, who have higher testosterone levels, who have like basic male muscle structures and potential, that so transgender women that are winning. Should it then be a problem that needs to be addressed?
Once we've identified a problem and we have enough cases or we have enough research to show that it is a problem, then yeah, that's something we should talk about. I don't think that we should necessarily frame it as trans versus cis. I think we can be more nuanced than that. But yeah, once the problem has been identified, I'm open to solving it.
Okay, but look, so the quantity of the occasion is what you're looking for. You want there to be more cases so we can make some kind of a judgment from it, so we can make some kind of a study. Yeah, but how many women will suffer because of it? How many cis women will, I mean, if it actually, imagine that it is true. Imagine that it is true that transgenders truly have an unfair advantage in strength. Will you make those cis women suffer just to find that out?
Yeah, that's the thing. That's a huge issue.
I mean, things have to happen for you to know what's going to happen. You can't decide policy based on a hypothetical what if someone gets hurt because of it. Because
it's a big likelihood considering the amount of trans women who
we don't know,
rose to the
except
top
it's
of
not
sports.
necessarily a big likelihood because we don't have enough studies to show that.
But there is
more studies.
like one or two studies. Okay, but like basically, it's the lab rats. The lab rat argument. We'll test it out on the lab rats until we get some definitive results. And we test it on him enough times to get that result.
And at the moment, as far as I'm aware, it's not an issue of life or death. It's an issue of sports. So if a few cis women
Okay,
don't
not life
win
or
the
death,
award,
but cranial damage.
But that's danger in any sport that involves contact. Any contact sport will involve the
Like
possibility.
mentally, that cis woman's like spirit is broken. She lost.
And what if she lost to another woman
she
who was
really
bigger than
got
her and,
overpowered
like,
according
otherwise?
to her.
What if she lost to a really, really big woman? and her spirit was broken by that. Does that mean that really, really big women shouldn't compete?
No. See, the difference is, I feel, yeah, honestly, it has to come every once in a while. This
Last minute? Can you smell something?
Yeah.
How do we make the distinction between the transgender woman and the really big woman?
10 to about 13 hours going.
A really big cis woman that beats the average cis woman.
Like Brienne from Game of Thrones.
No, Brienne is different. Lord,
Is the big woman here?
So how do we make the distinction between her?
You've been there for a while?
That's my question for you. I'm saying if the woman's spirit is broken, her spirit could be broken by anyone.
I'm just looking for.
No, you're right, but look, my point is not about that. My point is not comparing to the big woman. My point is saying that if you want to try it out more, fair enough. But it means you're putting the transgender women's rights above the cis women rights. It feels that way.
Historically speaking, trans women have had fewer rights.
So you want to balance that by giving them less rights now?
What rights am I taking away from cis women?
I mean, you're basically allowing them to keep trying what has been happening, even though we can kind of start seeing, even you might say it's not enough, but we are starting to see a tendency in what's going on now. But you're going to take the risk to make the cis women suffer and make them get beaten up by the trans women, just because you want to, but just because you don't believe what has happened yet. For now, it's enough.
If it's only happened a couple times, that's not enough to create policy. My point is
that you're taking a risk. You're taking a risk over the cis women.
I'll take a risk in favor of research and deciding policy that is based on objective study.
Even though that this might foster an environment of unfairness.
That's a hypothetical.
Right,
Until we can prove
there
either
are
way.
A couple of cases so far.
A couple of cases, again, does not a statistical study make until we can prove the dangers of something. You can say hypotheticals about anything.
I mean, I think our disagreement is in you think it's not enough to make any conclusion, and I honestly think that it's kind of enough at this point to make a conclusion on what is going on and make a judgment of the situation.
And we can disagree there.
I guess that's the main disagreement we have.
I don't know that we're going to change each other's minds on that.
Oh, yeah,
I just want further studies.
Yeah, it's fine.
So, how many cases would you recommend?
Yeah, do you have any number of cases?
I don't have a number because I'm not a researcher. I don't know what sorts of precedents there are for these cases, which I'm sure they exist. You know, people have been separated and included in things for ages, like sports. You know, giving women their own league and allowing women of different races to compete with each other have been things that have been studied before they came into play. Yeah. So I'd ask those researchers who have backgrounds in statistical study. I don't. I can't give you a number.
So just so we know what to take back home with us, right? So we have to find the distinction that between transgender women and big cis women, right? Because it would be deemed. We're saying that it would be deemed unfair for transgender women to participate in a cis women's sport, while at the same time it would be deemed fair for a big cis woman to participate, right?
Yeah.
So we need
Just
to find the distinction between the two.
Yeah.
So we can
kind of generally, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we can see why it should be wrong or illegal, or it would be unfair, and we could create a policy out of it to prevent cis women, transgender women, from participating with cis women in a sport such as wrestling.
I'm a transgender she-man. No, I'm a transgender she-man.
He's joking.
I'm a transgender she-man. He-man. I'm a
and the power of Grayskull.
Transgender female.
You've added a lot to the conversation.
I added a lot to it, and I subtracted a lot at the same time.
Anyway.
I extracted and I subtracted.
Okay.
Content over everything from your
Man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV.
report, yield coin. Yield coin.
Like research.
Yield coin.
Which one? Gold?
No, yield coin.
Yield.
Yield.
Is that even the top 100?
It's a new coin. You can search it up. There's a Samuel Co. There's a firm which issued a new coin.
What exchange is it on?
Info.